Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Stop Betting Sports Sunday Project. I'm glad to see you all here today. I'm Deb. I am moderating the panel today, and I am a gambling addiction therapist and the executive director of Stop Betting Sports. So if you've been with us before, welcome back. Thanks and good to see you again. And if you're new, welcome. So now I'm going to introduce our team and our panel here. First, we have Mr. Dan Field. He is a professor at USC and a gambling disorder specialist with over 15 years of experience helping individuals in recovery and helping families, helped so many people. And next, Mr. Mark Levkowitz, a compulsive gambler, even now with 43 years sober. He's helped thousands of people recover from gambling addiction, and he has built programs across California. He's big in the game, as we say in the UK. We've got Mr. Jared, a compulsive gambler, a former college football player, and a father who brings invaluable lived experience every time we turn up to Sunday conversation. And we have Matt. He's the CEO of Gamban. And Gamban, if you don't know, is one of the leading real tools in prevention. It is recognized globally. It is an app that you can download on your phone, which blocks access to gambling sites and apps across their devices. And if you want to find it, please check out our website. And if you are struggling with gambling and sports betting addiction, you can download Gamban today. Please check that out. And I want to be really clear about something. What we do at Stop Betting Sports in this webinar, is not therapy. We're here to give you support, awareness, and guidance on what to do if you're struggling with gambling or if you have a family member that is, how to recognize that. And also give you some options and ability to say, I'm not going to gamble today and make that choice real. So, I also want to introduce Jordan. Jordan is over there. Jordan Freeman. He is a MS about to complete his master's in social work and advocates for people who are gambling. He has his own coaching business over there. He's helping young men who are struggling with gambling, and he's also big in the game. Thank you, Jordan. And last but not least, Mr. Bobby G himself he has a passionate voice in recovery community and currently is a compulsive gambler and has 16 years, got to get this right, 16 years, 10 months and 6 days sober from gambling. Thank you, Bob. Again, welcome to the Sunday Project. I'm really excited to get started today. There's been some really interesting news this week. We're talking today about, well, as I just mentioned, a app on the phone that helps us, prevents us from gambling. There are also apps that do the opposite and are encouraging young people to gamble. And there's a really interesting story that we wanted to discuss with you guys. Mark, did you want to bring that up?
Sure. Thanks, Deb. Good afternoon. A new generation of betting platforms is raising concern among experts, not just for what they offer, but who they're reaching. One app gaining attention is Flip, often described as a social sports book. It allows users as young as 18 years old to make picks on sporting events using virtual currency and sweepstakes style rewards. While it's not technically considered gambling or traditional gambling, critics say it closely mimics the real thing with odds, payouts, and competitive leaderboards. And it's not alone. A broader wave of prediction market platforms is rapidly expanding, allowing users to trade on outcomes ranging from sports to politics to global events. These platforms often operate as legal gray areas, marketed more like financial exchanges. As platforms like Flip and emerging prediction markets continue to blur the line between gambling and investing, gaming, investing, and gambling, regulators and clinicians alike are asking the same question. Are we witnessing harmless innovation or the early stages of a growing public health issue? Stay with us. Back to you, Deb.
I'm staying right with you, Mark. I'm right here. To that question at the end, are we witnessing a problem with innovation? The innovation being so fast, we're trying to catch up with the speed of tech innovation, which is a huge concern, right? We went into a school the other day. We're talking about young people and this exposure to this app. We went into a school the other day, and Dan and I, as SBS, because we're doing prevention talks in schools now to young people. And our eyes were, again opened with what's going on with young people and their access to all of the access to gambling in general under the age of 18.
You
What do
know,
you think about Dan?
you know, um, can I jump in? They're not selling addiction, they're selling a stereotype. Everybody's doing it. You're not a fan unless you're doing it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Dan, what did you think about the on the clinical front with the app situation that we were talking about in class?
well, there's a lot of factors. One is what Bob says, the social reinforcement factor is that, all your friends are doing it, everyone's doing it. And then the idea of virtual currency itself, where you actually have to pay money to get virtual currency to play these games. So there seems to be some loophole with that because you're not actually betting on sports, but you definitely have skin in the game. And then just over time, you're going to go on a run, you're going to go on a streak. So if you're doing that in a video game or a prediction market with some negligible gray area around sports betting, you're going to have that experience of rising dopamine the more you're winning. And that just transitions right in like a gateway drug into more harder gambling. So it seems to me like it's grooming and like a gateway drug. When I was in high school, it was all about marijuana being a gateway drug to cocaine. There was a much clearer through line from Fliff into FanDuel and DraftKings and just more serious online gambling. To me, it's very clear and obvious.
They create the illusion that you're in the game. You're not even in the game. You're not even in the court, but that's the illusion.
It's funny when DraftKings and FanDuel started many years ago with fantasy sports, we in the field all knew that that was going to be a gateway drug to what was going to happen when they ended up with full-blown actually sports gambling. And we could never really find a smoking gun, but here it is, how those transition from just playing something as simple as fantasy sports and then going into sports betting. For me, I grew up in Coney Island, you know, which was sorry about that, which was like a neighborhood of learning pinball and skee ball and all the other games of chance, sort of for me was my gateway, like sort of what Bob said. I was way before digital cell phones and everything else, but I still had that start with everything was about action at a young
And
age.
what's so insidious about this is that these companies know the kids that are, engaging in these games online. And so they're going to be marketed to and targeted to with free play incentives, with influencers, with stuff coming up on their algorithms. They're a prime candidate to be the ones that are going to be problem gamblers, and the companies are going after them big time.
And the
I
problem
think
with Fliff is it's presented like a social sports book, right? So you win real cash prizes, but you don't need to put money in. It's like a virtual coin, which is why it's so appealing to kids, right? Because it's just like Monopoly. It's like fun play money, but you actually win cash prizes. So that's the danger of this because the kids are it's an illusion presented to them that they are sucked into that they are able to win this big money, right? But what you're doing is creating a gambling addiction.
Yeah, I think as well though it's happening in a context where young people now they're growing up and they're seeing all of the gambling advertising. They're seeing it marketed as an aspirational activity, very normalized and associated with watching sport. And they obviously can't gamble on legal sites that are regulated. So it's created an opportunity for products that subvert regulation and children can access these products. It's not just what you described. I think it's called Fliff. There's also skins betting. There's obviously some crypto platforms that children have access to. But I think all of this happens as a result of creating a climate where you make people want to gamble. And that comes through the initial legalization, through the initial promotion of gambling. And that's what affects young people the most, I think. And that's what creates that opportunity for these types of nefarious actors to exploit young people. And that's what they're doing. And I think it's interesting if you look at the US as a case study. when it legalized online gambling, online sports betting, it hasn't displaced the illegal market. It's just basically supplemented it. So illegal gambling has increased, legal gambling has increased. So in a way, the legal market has become this kind of gateway where people either access the legal market first and then they self-exclude and then they end up on the illegal sites, or young people are seeing all the advertising for gambling and they can't access that. So then they find the illegal sites which don't do any age verification or anything like that. So I think it's this normalization of gambling and encouraging people and to participate in betting all the time. That's the main driver of these opportunities.
And Jordan, you're seeing a lot of young people over there. You kind of coach youth and families, right? What's your take on it? What are you witnessing currently over there in New York with kids and gambling under 18? What are you seeing?
I mean, I see it all the time. I mean, in the meeting that I started based out of Maryland, but I live in New York now, so we get all people from all around. It's a virtual meeting. We get people under 18, 17, 16, 15, even 14. It's the marketing and how they want to target is they make it very easy for people to kind of like what Matt was saying to sign up for these apps and platforms. Um, but then, once you win or if you win, which doesn't happen too often, trying to withdraw, they make it a much more difficult process for you. Uh, I don't think they care how old you are. As long as as long as you're on their sites and you're gambling and keep depositing money, that's what feeds them. So it's very predatory towards young individuals, and there's not a lot of guardrails, especially for the offshore accounts that are hard to be monitored. But I'm seeing it everywhere in all different kinds of age brackets. And I think it's getting younger and younger as it's becoming more normalized.
Okay,
I
yeah,
oh go ahead.
go for
I
it.
I work with I don't want to keep saying the name because I don't hope it's no legal eyes, but I worked for one of the sports marketing agencies, and I know specifically they would know kids were underage, and they would just let them play. And then when it came time to withdraw, they're like, "Oh, verify your age, send your address, send your electricity bill," and never let them get out, and which was I thought was dangerous. But the real dangerous part about the youth doing it, and this is I think the most scariest thing, is they're building community with it. They get on these discords, and it's 15-year-olds all competing on which is the best. And I even saw like a commercial because gambling, they love advertising to me because I'm an ex, I'm in it. But I saw a commercial with John Hamm on BetMGM, and I was like, this is disgusting. It was like, you're gonna make your friends and you'll bond over betting for the rest of your life. And I was like, yeah, in a misery way. But I just noticed that like the aspect of like community and like how you guys are making friends with people that don't even live in your same city, but over betting is very dangerous in the sense where you try to break away, you feel like you're losing a part of your community.
Yeah, when we're talking about another community, is usually all the I don't know if not insulting you, Jared, but the jocks at high school all together. That sort of hidden community, like Fight Club. You don't talk about Fight Club either, and they keep it all secret, so nobody's turning anybody else in. And we know, the younger they are, the more likely. Like in the old days, the prevalency rate for gambling was around 2%. We always knew for adolescents it could be somewhere between 5 and 10%. And this is that on steroids. It might be as high as 20 or 30%.
We were just thinking about on SBS, do we actually call out people? Do we call people out for what they're doing, the celebrities and their names? And and what you just said, Jared, my reaction, I feel it. I feel so strongly about the power behind this influence and how at risk and vulnerable these people. Bob, do you have feelings on that?
Well, like as a, they're betting on millionaires who go home millionaires. It's a game, okay? And and you're financially at risk, but for them, it's just another Tuesday night, and they're going home, and that's the reality. And it's not action, it's transaction, and it's scary.
Yeah. Jared, again, what was the message to that to the youth from that celebrity there?
You saying celebrity in the sense of no, I was just saying community was what was going with the youth that I think is scary that they're on the Discord channels making friends and spending hours talking about games that are played the next day. And I will say that as athletes, it's most athletes take these endorsements. I mean, honestly, FanDuel and DraftKings are throwing the most money to podcasts, and any athlete that had a podcast, they're going to take that money because they want it, but they don't realize they're promoting a drug.
And as I said earlier, you're not a fan, you're a customer. You're logging into this financial, web that you have zero control over. I used to think if I had a bet on the game, I had control over the game, and the closer you get to the game, the further away you are from it.
But I
It's it's
really,
it's
yeah, go ahead.
it's wor- no, it's worse than being a customer in the conventional sense as well, because this is where I think gambling is an unusual sector. It's not like normal um it doesn't have a kind of market logic to it really. Like it's basically uh the operator's trying to take as much as it can from you, and you're trying to win against the operator. Obviously, you've got a massive disadvantage because they've got all the data, they've got all the processes that make it really difficult to withdraw money, all the terms and conditions, right? So everything's weighted against you. But it's that adversarial relationship that means that where you've got innovation, so new innovations, whether it's like parlays, prop bets, or anything around that, any new platforms that basically aren't regulated as gambling, but they obviously look and feel like gambling, like day trading or predictions, all of these innovations are not in the interest of the consumer. They might be attractive to the consumer in the first instance, but they're not. They're designed to take more from the consumers. So
Well,
it's all a deception, I would say. I think that the whole sector is kind of built on this deception, and the more that the industry is allowed to innovate and optimize its products and its platforms and escape regulation, the more people will be basically exploited by it. So it absolutely needs like proper regulation. Otherwise, left to its own devices, then people are going to be really harmed by it, basically. And I think that's already happening a lot in the US.
Yeah,
they're
no,
they're
if
they're
they said,
profiting from the minority who can't handle it, not the majority who can dabble. So that's their target are the people that can't handle it. That's the algorithm.
Yeah.
Some
But
people,
it's also turning, I think, the people that maybe aren't addicted yet, it's trying to get them to engage more. And that's the thing. Like anyone who might think, oh, I can gamble without a problem at the moment, they are trying to get you to gamble more and to get you to gamble beyond your means and lose more than you can afford. And they've got huge amounts of data and techniques and their ability to profile their customers, their ability to kind of try and basically encourage you and entice you to engage longer than you would have planned to. It's quite extraordinary what they've got on all of their customers.
Which is
Um,
exactly why we've
yeah,
started to go into schools, because we're trying to get in there just before this happens and let the kids know and have a choice, right? Get the option to make a choice, to understand why it is that they are so vulnerable. It's because the part that stops you from taking risks isn't fully developed in the brain yet, right? We actually heard one of the answers when I said, "Do you care that this celebrity is on Kick live streaming playing slots with the kid?" And the answer from this young man was, "I don't care," because that's the truth. These kids don't care, and the gambling industry know that. They don't care because why should they? You don't care until you've got memories of emotions that you felt because you have suffered from your own behaviors. And that happens later on with lived experiences, which is why rock bottom is different at the age of 30 to what a 17-year-old is going to have. So we are, and for everyone listening, starting to go into schools. We have to try and, stop the bleeding before it starts. Sorry, going to pivot over to you, Mark. Did you
yeah,
have that?
yeah. And that was a great point. I want to pivot on something that Jared said. The fact that for us on this panel that have lived experience, gambling was a drug, and that's what we don't get across on TV. You know, I always say if the with cannabis being legal in many states, if they said the first joint was free, everybody would be in an uproar. Or if LeBron James was passing a joint to Kevin Hart and say, "Ooh, smoke this pot, it's the best pot," people would go nuts. But yet we allow ourselves, I think gamblers are the most unsympathetic addicts, that nobody cares that, that being a drug, it has a way higher suicide ideation of any legal drug by far. Maybe 1 out of 300 people who gamble, and especially younger people who have no idea how to cope with what's going on, where when they're broke and they've just sold their Xbox and everything else, and there's nowhere to turn to, and they're in that secret society in high school, they don't mention that. And that to me always blows me away, that they never talk about the symptoms from gambling on any of the commercials. Do they do that, Matt, in the UK?
No, they don't. No, there's a lot of the messaging in the UK is still focused on trying to suggest to people that they shouldn't gamble more than they can afford, and around safer gambling and this notion of safer gambling. And the gambling industry is required to promote safer gambling. However, there's a real contradiction between that messaging and their practices, which is to try to get all their customers to engage beyond their means, which seems to be happening very frequently. It's core to the commercial model. I think, as Bob said, they are reliant on people losing more than they can afford. I think we had a piece of research in the UK. You can look it up if you're interested. It's called Patterns of Play. It used the data from all of the top operators, and they've found that 86% of the profits are coming from 5% of the customers, and they're the people that are addicted or at risk.
Mhm.
So logically, then it's not in the gambling industry's commercial interest. They can't reconcile with their commercial model this responsible gambling mantra that they're trying to kind of propagate. Because if they did take less money from people that are addicted, it would have a huge impact on their profits. The current commercial model is overly dependent on getting people to gamble more than they can afford.
Well, speaking of symptoms, what you just mentioned, Mark, like do they, advertise what the symptoms look like over in the UK? Sounds like they don't. I wonder if they do in Australia. What we do know is what they're doing in the rest of the world is much better than what we're doing over here because we're not doing much at all. So what we want to do here at SBS is allow people to understand what the symptoms look like. So let's talk about that. What does it look like? How do you know? How do I know if I'm struggling with an addiction? I think there might be something going on with me. I'm unable to put my phone down. There are so many things to know about this. How do you know, Dan? How do you know if you're struggling or might be developing an addiction to gambling?
Well, there's a lot of different symptoms, and the one I want to emphasize is a kind of intuition or a feeling that, gosh, this is a problem. And that could manifest in, that you try to stop and or you have a conversation and like, I'm not going to gamble anymore. Or once I gamble this game, I'm done. Or once I hit this amount of money, it's over. And then you break those self-imposed rules. That is a sign right there that you're breaking your own rules. And now you're kind of lying or deceiving to your parents or your friends, when you're in action. So there's this whole drama going on in your pocket, on your phone, on your laptop in class. And there's all this like other gambling activity going that no one knows about. Yes, it's social for a lot of people, and you're bragging about fantasy or whatever, but it's more isolative. You're getting money that you shouldn't be getting through credit cards or through loans or borrowing money and then betting more than you can afford. You're betting at night. I mean, this is where it gets pretty more, obvious. It's midnight and you're behind and you're throwing a bet in, European cricket or football. These are obvious signs that, you have a problem. And then just the classic one that a lot of lay people don't understand is the thrill of the chase, the thrill, the euphoria that you get which can't be matched by other things, including a great meal or great sex or great anything. For a gambler, that euphoria is super high. And I would say that it's higher than Coke or anything. If you've witnessed someone who is getting off on sports betting and winning, they're out there. They're out there for sure. And if that's you, you're just not going to kind of come down and start having a normal conversation with yourself, setting limits, not chasing. If you feel those highs and you have that predisposition for it, you've been gambling for a while with some success and a lot of failure, probably have a gambling disorder, and you need to come to the Sunday Project and probably talk to someone about it, because you can't talk to yourself about it. You need treatment. You need some tools and some insight. And right now, it's very confusing. You have to be a responsible gambler. What are the resources? We're a good resource right here to get you into treatment, at least in the state of California. So, there are other symptoms as well, but that kind of gives you a flavor of
I'd
what
like
it is.
to add, I'd like to add to that, Dan. If you're gambling quite a bit and you have lied about anything to do with that, if you have lied once about what you're doing, about anything to do with money, getting money from somewhere, anything to do with lying to do with this, ask yourself why. Because generally, we shouldn't have to lie if we're doing the right thing, right? And
Well,
that might
some
be a guilt
gamblers
trap.
lie and they have a conscience, and some gamblers lie and their conscience challenged. They don't understand that the lying hurts others, and that's a painful part. Is that when you lie to your mom, it hurts her. And the hardest part of gambling treatment is to reconcile with the people that you've hurt. They're not gambling in a weird way. It's hard as hell, but it's the easy part. It's the relationships. And then 6 months later, mom may not trust you and accuse you of gambling when you're not, and that hurts you as a gambler in recovery, you
I
know?
remember when
So
I
they do
told
this stuff.
I remember when I told a lie in the height of my disease and I didn't get caught. It became the truth.
Yeah. It's funny what Dan, you just led us into the big part of this conversation that we're leaving out are the parents. There might be some parents, hopefully as guest here on this show, is how they can identify, because a lot of times it might look like they have a drug or alcohol problem and maybe they drug test them or something else. Problem solved, but yet it causes those same problems. And I think parents need to be educated, a little bit more of what those symptoms are. Uh, my parents never knew I had a gambling problem until it was over. And then I finally got help and then learned that I had a gambling problem. I don't know what they thought I was going on with. So I think it's really important, hopefully, if there are parents here, is for them to get education and how to understand whether or not their kid, who's like I said, lost their Xbox is gone, that might ask the right questions and get them help at a younger age.
Jordan, I saw you nodding a bit earlier when I was talking about symptoms. Like, I'd love to know a bit more about how you realized you had a gambling problem and what happened with you, if you wouldn't mind sharing with everyone.
Yeah, of course. For me, I realized that it took me a while to realize that I had a problem. It took me trying to experiment over and over and over again with doing things in moderation, or at least telling myself that I would do it differently this time. I would only do straight bets. I would only place 2 bets a week. Trying to set up all these different boundaries and rules for myself, and I was never, ever, ever able to follow my own rules. And I eventually just had to realize that, it wasn't working. I couldn't keep the promises that, I was making to myself, that I would stop, or that this was also the last time I would ever put myself in this position. I would remember be sitting there like kind of scared, after a situation of, putting myself in a lot of debt or doing things that I wasn't proud of. And I remember like getting out of the situation, like finally, and I remember like how stressful it was, um, and how terrible I felt. And I remember saying to myself, or just thinking to myself, just being like scared. So I was just scared. I was like, okay, I got out of myself, but like, what is going to happen to me? Like in a week, or a couple days. Like I'm sitting here in this moment and I feel that so strongly that I'm never going to do this again. Um, but I couldn't like trust myself. I didn't, and that's a scary feeling, knowing that you don't know how I'm going to respond, and because and that's really when I knew that I lost control. Um, and like you said, Deb, the lies, and there's also, 20 questions, if you go to Gamblers Anonymous that you could read, that kind of could give you a sense of, is your gambling problematic? And it's also very difficult because it's subjective, um, and when you draw that line, when do you have a problem? When do you call yourself a compulsive gambler? And that's up to you. But there's a lot of signs, and we talked about some of them just here that you could look out for. Um, and for me, the main indicator is that I couldn't, I tried over and over again to do it like a normal, quote unquote, normal person. Um, Even being 26 now and at a young age, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And I had to swallow my pride, to realize that this was something that was a problem that was beyond greater than my control. So that's my take on it.
Just to come in on that, thank you for sharing. It's really like obviously fascinating to hear you speak about your experience. I believe I was addicted to gambling, but I think that there are many people, and perhaps people who are in attendance here, who might not feel like they are addicted yet, or they are a quote unquote compulsive gambler or disordered gambler, or however you want to sort of pathologize it. But I think that the industry is producing gambling products now that are so addictive and so compelling that you don't have to be an addicted gambler to experience harm from them. And I think that there is a lot of a cohort of people, significant cohort of the customer base of gambling companies who may not be addicted yet, but who are losing a lot, who think exactly as you did, Jordan, I'm just going to do $20 or I'm just going to do $50. And then once they start gambling, it's distorting their cognitive functions. They're then like in the game, they're then thinking differently. And it's the same with lots of platforms now that are optimized for engagement. It's the same with social media. It's the same with, there's lots of different sort of mechanics in the apps that we use on our phones that are designed to be addictive, designed to drive engagement. Doesn't mean we're necessarily problem social media users. It just means that these are addictive apps and addictive platforms. So I think the only thing I would say is whether you think you're an addicted gambler or not, you may still be experiencing harm from engaging with the platform. And if you're experiencing harm from it, then that's a good reason to stop as well.
Yeah, Matt, what you said I think is great, and that's where if the operators really wanted to help is that sweet spot between problem and addiction before the brain changes. And they could
Yeah.
notice in the beginning as those patterns start to change right away. I always say, before if you remain a cucumber, you're always going to be a cucumber. Once you go and become a pickle, you're not going to be able to go back. And I think they know who those high level cucumbers are who are starting to increase. And instead, what are they doing? They're giving them comps probably, and that's the thing we don't see. Like in a casino, we know they'll send you a limousine, you'll get free buffet tickets or whatever. It's very obvious the comps, but people don't. I deal with a lot of people, they'll give them $5,000 free bets. I know people who have been sent to the Super Bowl, whatnot, to keep them gambling. So, but I think they have a really in a great position to determine before they sort of cross that line and really target those people and get them help before it's a lifetime disease.
Question.
Everybody has a different relationship with risk. That's the bottom line. And I think that, and these algorithms, they could sense it out about risk, what it means to this guy versus that guy.
Question in the audience I'd like to help with myself from a parent, but generally asking, how do I know? How do I know if my child might have? She says, or he, I ask because my son will gamble once in a while. I don't see it as a problem, but want to know when it is so I can start watching closer. I'd start by saying as well, as a mum of three boys, having a good close relationship is important, and they get to an age, like I'd say it's around 12, where things change for so many reasons, right? If you are having open communication and good conversations with your child, I would say would help a lot, because you then are faced with the challenge as a parent when they go to middle school. They are exposed to lots and lots more, and they don't tell you everything. So it really starts with knowing your child. And if you've got a gut feeling that something has changed or is up, and this is just before you see the obvious things like, you know, behaviors with their phone, behaviors with their moods, their mood changes, or they look like they're hiding something, or they ask you for anything to do with money, or they want we've had children, young people steal from their parents, and we talk to parents all the time about how that happened. But really, it's understanding what this is and what the symptoms look like. I've just put a bunch of those in the chat for the gambler who is trying to recognize if they've got a problem, but it's different for a parent. Being able to spot and recognize if your child is gambling is tricky. It could also happen. It starts with video games, for parents that don't know this, who are starting to become aware of it. It starts with their relationship with video games, if they're on screens a lot, and then in the video games like Minecraft and Roblox, loot boxing and buying skins. You can buy things in video games which allow you to get to the next part of the game, right? And give you leverage. So it's the same part of the brain, and it molds the brain and shapes the brain and preps the brain for developing a gambling disorder. So thank you for reminding me, the audience. Yes, parents standing together, we are affiliated with Parents Standing Together. If you are a parent and you're looking for some support and you're struggling with this at this moment, have a child who might have a gambling problem and don't know what to do, if you look on our website, there is a link to Parents Standing Together, and Kim has also just put it. Kim is Kim's in the chat. She's just put the link in parentsstandingtogether.org. So click on that, and they have groups supporting parents as well who are looking for resources and guidance on what to do if your child is struggling with problem gambling. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Deb is saying. One is, finding the right time to talk about this issue with your kids, which may not be when they're in trouble or there's some tension around homework or too much video game time or whatever. And then the second one is find out about their gaming. The gambling industry has used the word gaming and not gambling. So, I don't know, play the video games with them. We found out that 2K, when we went to the high school, you buy skins or you buy players. Like the video games, as we know, or most of us know, the big money is made not in the initial purchase, but the in-game purchasing. So sit down and learn 2K, play some games with your kids. Not that it's just something that they're doing over there, and find the culture of who they're playing with and how they're playing. And if they want money to buy video games or skins for their teams, that could be sort of a segue into gambling behavior. But talk to them and like sit down and play the game with them.
I couldn't agree more, Dan. I join them, understand what they're doing, listen to their banter, their narrative, how they're talking, and just be there, be present.
Jordan, I'm wondering what's your take on that? Parents who may suspect that their kids have a gambling problem.
It's It's tough because when do parents step in? When do they say something? And that is something why it's so important that the parents are educated, and that's why we have resources for that to help because there's a such thing in my opinion in overstepping, but there's also something you could understep and not intervene when it's appropriate. Um, but I agree on all points that were touched on in terms of really understanding, with understanding, what your kids are doing. Maybe ask questions from a point of like curiosity, not accusing, curiosity. Like, wait, what are you doing? Can you help me understand? Um, and allow your children to kind of be open about it with you in terms of the types of gambling that they're doing and why they're doing it, maybe try to learn what brings them excitement to it, because then maybe it could be easier to identify if it's a problem, if it starts to turn into one, if your children feel open around doing it. Because I know for me, from personal experience, um, gambling was very secretive for me from the very beginning, even before I quote unquote, defined it a problem or it was an issue. And my parents, and it always had to be a secret. I was in middle school playing video games downstairs with with my friends in the basement, and I had to be quiet back then. I had to tell my friends, Shh, like, my parents are upstairs. They can't hear that we're gambling on video games right now. And I was in middle school and I was hiding it. Not that I had necessarily a quote unquote problem in middle school, but it was just a secret. And the secrecy is what turns the behavior, it could turn the behavior to be more problematic, if you're doing it in secret. So, having open conversations and open dialogue would be my biggest thing, with the families, and again, asking questions from a point of curiosity versus accusing them, that they have a problem or that they're doing something wrong.
Jared, you've got a daughter, right? What's your stance on her access to playing games, phones, and has your history with your own gambling behavior made you feel a certain way about what she's exposed to?
Well, A, it would break my heart if she ever became a gambling addict, but I also do know my mother has struggled with gambling and her mother did. And so I do know there's a genetic component that makes you susceptible to it. Um, I do think that sometimes my behaviors, even being around her sometimes when I was in the thick of it, I was halfway present and on my phone, and she would kind of look at that phone. And I think the phone at her age is what's the addiction right now, not necessarily gambling, but it looks like the forbidden fruit, the thing I don't want her to do. So she kind of wants to. And I mean, obviously, the phone is the gateway to gambling now, but I just think that I mean, as we become more aware, I think a lot of times when I fell into this, I didn't know how dangerous it was. And I want to make sure I express to my daughter how YouTube and social media and telephone, and especially any gambling app, is very, very addictive. And to keep her away from that, ideally, so she doesn't have to go through the pain that I went through.
I think there are some really also teachable moments, like you're with your kid at a carnival and they want you to win them a stuffed animal. And I don't know if any of you, I grew up with I played poker with all the guys that used to run those games. And, you end up getting sucked in. Instead, tell your kid, look, this is for suckers. I'll go home and I'll buy you the most expensive thing that's up there on the board, because you're not going to win. Or you're watching a game with your son, if I was watching a game with the son, somebody might say, hey, I'll give you $5 of my action, probably the most dangerous thing you could ever do. Whereas opposed to, hey, what are those numbers going across the screen? Explain about what odds are, about what money is, and that, at that age, instead of encourage, parents think it's normal or giving them lottery tickets for their birthday or whatever that's like, is to avoid those kind of behaviors. Uh, I see like sometimes some of the hardest people to treat are when fathers gamble with their sons, and their sons have that memory locked in. So I think there are things that we can do in educating parents of not to make it worse, and
Mark,
understand.
And I'm going to pivot
d-
to Dan. I'm going to pivot to
Yeah.
Dan straight away, Dan. I just want to talk again about on SBS today. We're talking and discussing a lot about how, as a parent, to recognize if your child has a problem with gambling. We can also discuss how that might affect you as a parent. And once again, Parents Standing Together is an organization that's been created to help parents, and that is parentsstandingtogether.org. Please look up their website, and also you can find them on SBS. Dan, to Mark's point about being exposed to gambling as a child and looking at your parents' behaviors with gambling.
Yeah, there's a lot to pick apart there. And yeah, I just want to say again, Parents Standing Together is a terrific organization. But it's hard, but there are sometimes shared culpability for why a kid will develop a gambling disorder. The obvious one is where a dad takes a kid to, a horse race, or other stories I've heard where a dad says, "Hey, let's pick some teams together at age 11." I mean, it's kind of like, "Hey, have a drink with me," or "Let's smoke tobacco together." It seems innocent or innocuous at the time. Also buying cards together. I love baseball cards and collected them when I was a kid. But buying Pokemon cards is a different thing now. When their cards are going to drop, what you need to do to get the cards, the value of these cards. So if your 11-year-old was really into Pokemon cards and you encourage that, and now they have a gambling disorder at 17, there's a through line there. And there's an involvement on the parents that is important to look at. There's some mitigating circumstances why a 17-year-old is gambling. And a lot of gamblers, both 17 or 37, feel this sense of responsibility, 100% responsibility. No one forced me to do this. This is my gambling. It's my fault. And when you pick it apart, there's a lot. The industry, the algorithms, what Matt was talking about. So kind of lessening the blow to the person who's gambling and even lying and stealing around their gambling, you know.
Matt, have you found that lots of youth have downloaded Gamban onto their phones?
Yeah, we're getting a lot more young people as users now. And our user numbers are increasing all the time, and we don't take a lot of data, personal data, when people sign up. But whenever we do surveys of our user base, it's skewing younger and younger as time goes on. And I just think that we're in a quite a unique position, I suppose, because we're able to add all sorts of different things to our block list. We basically decide what we think is gambling and what we consider to be gambling. And that obviously things get added. And I think there's a lot of platforms now that appeal directly to children. I think we touched upon them earlier, but there's also the skins casinos, which I think are a real problem, and basically allowing people who play games like Counter-Strike to take the skins that they obtain within the game off the platform and gamble with those on casinos that use the API of Steam or Valve or whatever the platform is for the game. I find that very, very concerning, and it seems to be going under the radar. And there's a lot of these kind of mechanisms or innovations that try to subvert the regulatory framework. And so, yeah, I think with any parents who are concerned about the children getting involved in different forms of gambling that perhaps they're not even aware of, I would recommend that they put blocking software on their children's devices so they can't access that type of content.
I think that's absolutely right. And I'm just so grateful for you, Matt, that you've created this and that this is available. And I love the fact that you're looking at those demographics and sort of making those connections, and that you're looking, well, is this gambling? We think this is gambling. There you go. Take this, put this on your phone. Great message to parents to have Gamban. If you think your child might be, or you find out that your child is struggling with gambling behaviors, you can put Gamban on their phone and it will block them from gambling. How brilliant, how smart is that? I'm about to launch a poll. This is for you to check in with yourself to see if you have a problem with gambling. If you're not a gambler, just please read the poll, see what questions that might help you understand what it might look like if somebody has a problem with gambling. But feel free to answer these questions. And whilst I've got someone already taking part, brilliant. That is a poll that's on the screen there. You can read and answer those questions. Jared, I wanted to check in with you and ask you how it's been going.
Um, I'm doing good. I think the community I've built here has helped me out. I am back in the belly of the beast. Arizona is where I'm at currently, and that's always been my kryptonite. I've always done terrible here because a lot of my brothers and friends and family all engage in sports betting, and there's some stress factors here that have always got to me. But I think because I'm building this little bit of strength between this and kind of also the sheer fact that sports are not really playing right now is helping me. But I do think the community feel with this whole addiction, I kind of now that I put my eyes on it, coming down is like a slope, it's a slide, and it's easy to fall down as far as you want. But getting out of it is like climbing up a high, steep mountain with a weight vest on. And I think because if I was doing this on my own, it'd be nearly impossible. But with Dan and now even this meeting with Mark and Bob and seeing people who have done it telling you, hey, keep stepping, and right now I'm struggling, and I know this with my brain resetting from dopamine. And I found myself now I'm trying to stop like just pounding caffeine, watching so much social media. And I mean, obviously, I'm staying away from the app, but I'm trying to replace it. And I know that's a problem. So I'm going to continue to try to find healthy habits to replace that dopamine. But as I mean, if anyone's watching this, they're struggling, I'll say this is the right place to start that hike back up. And I'm doing better because I'm involved in this program.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Mark.
no, it's because it's interesting. Sort of last week we talked about making the bed, which was a really interesting conversation. But what Jared just said, or things like pushing it out, like not just the metaphor of hiking, but actually going out and hiking or doing other activities like that, and to encourage other activities, like parents to take their kids, instead of letting, them alone and figure things out for themselves, is to give kids alternate opportunities to keep them away from gambling.
Dan, you were going to say to Jared?
Well, I found the best type of treatment is, threefold. One is to actually get a good working relationship with a counselor, someone that you just can just be honest and real with, has your best interest at heart, will listen and give good advice. So that is a really important component. And then the second part, maybe more important or equally important, is the group. The fact that you log on or go to a meeting and just recognize the disorder with other people. There's something invisible and beautiful that happens when you're just in a room with others that are on the same course. Something good happens when you listen and respond and feel that connective tissue. So individual, group, and then the third is just the idiosyncratic things that you're going to do. For me, it's been making the bed this week. It both has to do with, addiction and just, positive movement. But, typically exercise, making the bed, singing, dancing, nature, hobbies, history, music, these things that bring joy to your life and dopamine outside of gambling. Don't expect that listening to music is going to give you the same level of dopamine as gambling did, but that's an important part of it too. So finding those activities, the counseling, the group, and then just the individual idiosyncratic stuff of living a good life. And of course, relationships with people that are important. That is part of living a good life.
So, to the audience, this is what we talk about with people we work with, our clients, when they're in recovery, trying to stay on the path and stay sober from a gambling addiction. And it is work, and it is constantly reminding yourself that you are addicted to this thing that is a compulsion. That's why we say, I am a compulsive gambler, and that takes work and effort. And Bob,
I'll shut up after this, Deb.
No,
But
go.
that's the first part of GA is surrender, willingness, admitting that you have a problem, whether you call it compulsive gambling, problem gambling, or gambling addiction. And then once you admit that, there are all of these doors that are open to you, like this program and other programs, and you can really change in a really positive and meaningful way, like Jared, you are, like navigating a setting where gambling is prevalent, navigating a setting where friends and family are gambling, that all the triggers are there. It's more precarious, I know, in Arizona than Los Angeles, but you're navigating it, and having this group and talking about it is part of that. But it's a very delicate thing at first, but it builds in strength and foundation over time.
Yeah,
And I
and
want to pivot to Bob. Sorry, I want to pivot to Bob. And when Jared was sharing about his uphill struggle, I forget exactly how you said it, but you said something about a mountain. And I felt you for a reason, Bob. And I think it's big. Well, you've told me how it was a struggle for you. And I was wondering what you were feeling as Jared was sharing about his struggles this week.
Um, Listen, theory is theory, but imagery is important. And I try to just draw pictures that people can relate to. For instance, talking to a young kid, it's going to be difficult to sit and talk about theory. But when you draw the picture, as I said earlier, these are millionaires going home millionaires, and you're financially exposing yourself to something you have zero control over. That's a picture, that you can visualize. And just you're betting on something you have zero control over, zero control. And if they could start to understand that, I think it could help move the needle. I'm really grateful that my son is 25 years old and he's never placed a bet in his life, and because he knows my story and he knows where it took me.
Right.
you know,
And sorry, Mark, go back to Mark.
yeah, because I think the dopamine is a really important thing to talk about. Maybe next week or in another group that we focus on dopamine, because sort of what happens is, gambling puts out so much dopamine. And in order for us, generally the reason why we gamble, it's a reaction to stress. And when we're stressed, we need now this much dopamine. What gives up this much dopamine? Like really hardcore gambling. And the riskier, the riskier. And that's how the tolerance just keeps increasing. But what's interesting is sort of, I want to go back to the hiking thing. Is your friend, you're in the throes of gambling, and your friend calls you up and say, "Let's take a hike." Gambling's here, hiking is here. You're not going to go hiking. But if you force yourself, like I work in inpatient treatment, and we take them hiking, and they have a great time, and they sort of get that dopamine rush. Or going to a meeting, getting empathy, gives a dopamine rush. And that's what's going to bring that thing down, is to find normal things now. And that dopamine, it doesn't happen overnight, but that dopamine level goes when you sort of start forcing yourself and saying yes when people ask you to go out and take a hike or watch a sunset, things that normally you wouldn't have done because it's not giving up that dopamine. So it's a great way, Dan was just talking about it, of I believe replacement. Find things that have a higher power now again. And I'm talking, from a spiritual or it's not even a spiritual point, of find things that have a higher power than gambling, and start doing them.
Do you feel like there's a
And
time?
well, I'm sorry, Jared.
No, I was just asking, like, I know you said it's not gonna happen overnight. And I mean, as I'm kind of going through this, do you feel like there's a time period where it starts to ease up? Because I just feel like you're right. Right now, going for a hike just doesn't do anything for me, but I know ultimately it will. Does it take months, years?
In my opinion, it does take a while, and the longer you've been on your phone betting, intensely, you've clocked perhaps thousands of hours over many years. It's not realistic to think that even within 90 days, your brain is going to just embrace these other activities. But when you commit yourself to them and do them, despite the fact that you don't feel like it, you just keep on pushing, that pushing through that resistance, like we talked about making the bed, but getting that in accelerates the dopamine. It's like, you know what? This was not fun, but I did it and I feel better. And you start building that resolve, like any of us that have a physical fitness program. And then there's a momentum. And then there's a memory, not like thinking about bad beats at night, but you think about how hellish gambling was. There is an aversion that develops, and it is like PTSD, but that crystallizes as something that you just have, it like makes you want to vomit and just disgusting to you. And that happens over time. So now you're pushing through your sloth or whatever, you're working out, and then there's this like, why would I go back to this kind of thing? I don't want this. It's disgusting. And then you nurture that aversion and you're moving in a different direction. And those things happen simultaneously. And then over maybe some months, it becomes easier. But then without warning, you might just say, damn it, I want to gamble. You always have to, it's a very impulsive thing. You could just have a thought. So that's why you want to stay connected to the Sunday program or the Monday group or the Tuesday. You want to have your thing to remind yourself on the weekly that you're doing these things. Otherwise, that impulse could just go crazy.
Yeah. I almost felt like when I played sports, we would go into camp and it'd be hell week, and you knew it was going to be tough, but it was part of getting to where you wanted to be. And I almost feel like with gambling, especially just because, when I get into it, oftentimes you see the people who are very successful, and I think it should be more expressed like, hey, hell month, hell 90 days, but it's going to suck for 90 days, but at the end, it's better. And I feel like that might help people understand, like, just push through this first block of resistance.
And
Yeah,
that's
I think
why,
Oh,
go ahead, Matt.
sorry, thanks, Mark. I think that's so true. I think coming to terms with and accepting that when you stop gambling, you don't want to put another bet on, but that's not the end, and that you're going to feel a bit rubbish for a period of time. You're not going to feel yourself, but that's not going to last forever. And just being able to accept that and sit with it and just sit with those negative feelings, knowing that this is part of the process of your brain recalibrating and becoming, going back to normal. That's part of the process. I think not understanding that puts you at more risk of relapse, because then you think, if I gambled, I'd feel normal again. But actually, even when you're gambling, you're not feeling normal. It's sort of suspended animation. I think it's sort of like just keeping the show on the road. But like you'll go, I think for me personally, when I quit gambling, I gambled for 4 years, and I gambled when I was age 16 to 20. I was very addicted to the machines, and it probably took me about 2 or 3 years to go back to how I was feeling before I started gambling. But I felt more normal probably 2 or 3 months after I quit. But I think like that was quite a specific experience for me, because I think I was still growing up, and I didn't have much of a frame of reference for when I was not gambling. So I think it depends on like your experience with it really. But yeah, you're not going to feel yourself for a while, but that's okay, and that's not going to last forever.
That's why self-help support is so important, especially in the beginning. I know, like Jared, you're in Arizona, in Phoenix area, I'm guessing. There's this incredible beginners meeting, where everybody is sharing those same feelings, of, what, this really is hard. And when you talk about it in a group and other people say, yeah, it's hard, let's work together and doing it, that's normal to do it, as opposed to, what, the other people who got 20, 30 years, it's easy for them. But I think it's really important to be with others and know that you're not alone and that other people are going through those same tough experiences in the beginning.
yeah. And in that beginner's meeting, you may have a feeling as a problem gambler that I can't imagine my life without gambling. Like, I know it's terrible, but I really just don't want to frigging stop because I love it so much. And I just don't want a life without gambling. And at that point, you really do need counseling to talk about this stuff, because there's a rigidness and a stubbornness in your character that really needs to be confronted, because your life is being destroyed because of gambling, yet you are so rigidly adherent to this thing that is so bad for you. And it can turn south in terms of like a masochistic quality, or I'm going to die without it. I'm going to die. I'm going to, go out swinging or die. There's a fatalistic, dangerous thinking to some people. Like, no one's going to, I know I'm going to stop and I'm going, but you're deeply ambivalent and you don't want to get rid of it. And I want to ask you to please consider the seriousness of your behavior, and that your life with time is much better without it, you know? Yeah.
You know, sports betting has not changed the game. It's changed how much the game costs.
Good.
Sorry, guys, I'm experiencing some technical, so if I'm frozen, I apologize for that. Um, Matt, I loved hearing a bit about your share, and I hope to hear a bit more about your experience growing up next week. And it reminded me about a quote in Dr. Rosenthal's book, From Self-Deception to Self-Forgiveness. Dr. Rosenthal is over here in California and works with UCLA, as we are affiliated with UCLA. And there's a quote in his book that it says, no man will ever step in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man. You will never go back to who you were before you gambled. You will never. You will. That's the beauty of neuroplasticity, the ability to rewire your brain in recovery. And so when the healing begins and when you do rewire your brain with all the things we've been talking about today in recovery, new habits, new routines, being disciplined, being accountable, holding yourself accountable, accepting that you are, you know, you are not in control of this, and getting yourself to GA, getting yourself reprogrammed, getting yourself a therapist, all the things that needs to go into if you've got a problem with this and it's severe. You will never be the same as you were before, except for Matt, you were a child. It's like when you're 16 and when you're 20, it's not like you can go back to being what you were when you're 16 anyways. It's so important that we get the message up and out there about what's happening to children because the brain is so vulnerable. The severity of what happens to the brain when it is wiring at the time of growing, and you're wiring a gambling addiction into a growing brain, that's a huge problem. And I have experience with clients currently that started gambling on fantasy football in middle school, a little bit here and a little bit there at the age of 13, 14, and is now 25 with over $1 million debt from sports betting apps. So if you're growing up, and this is why it's so important that we get into schools and get this message across. If you're growing up and you start playing these games, really need to know what's happening to the brain, as do the parents. So yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes, though, whether it's gambling or weed or drinking, there's a desire to go back to a time when life was simpler, like when you could just smoke weed and you imagine you're smoking weed with your friends at high school and you miss those days. So you kind of revert back to these old behaviors because of a nostalgia factor. Like, why can't I just gamble? I used to gamble, or some, simplified version of what happened in your life. So sometimes as you get older, you want to be younger. It's so kind of weird. And when you were younger, you were smoking weed, even though now it's clearly bad for your mental health. So I don't know. Sometimes there's a like Peter Pan refusal to grow up or a desire to go backwards to when life was simpler, when you could gamble simply or smoke weed simply or drink simply, whatever it is. And that's something that a lot of us contend with in mental health. Yeah.
Every game comes to an end, but there's no end to the losses.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I would never be the same person I was before I started gambling, and in a way, I'm kind of grateful that I started gambling when I did, and I had time after to kind of get my life back on track and figure out that that was not something I wanted to ever do again. And it could have been worse if I'd found it later in life, maybe. But I think like just generally like how I felt, like that calmness was not something that returned for a while. And actually, I did have, I think, residual mental health issues as a result of the addiction that was kind of like, I don't know, Dan, you mentioned PTSD. I think probably I did have symptoms of PTSD in recovery. And like, and all of these things, I think if you're cognizant or like you're aware of how you're feeling, what your emotional state is, that this is part of recovery, that this is part of your brain, as I say, recalibrating, then it just helps you like handle it better, I think, like just helps you understand it better. Whereas when I was in recovery, this was sort of 2010, was actually before gambling addiction was even in DSM-5. I think that came in 2011. So I didn't really know what was happening to me. I didn't understand why I was feeling the way I was feeling. I just thought if I stop gambling and I don't bet, then I should be back to normal. And actually, I think understanding that process in recovery is really important.
Yeah, I think, gambling is the best drug for mood disorders. Unfortunately, you have to always be gambling while it's working because when you stop, it's going to come back, whatever it is. But gambling is going to treat anxiety, general anxiety, major depression, ADHD better than Zoloft or Lexapro or any other drug. Unfortunately, and that's the point that sort of I made earlier, we're not talking about then what are the side effects, right? If it's a Lexapro commercial on TV, they're going to talk about can cause suicide, can cause this, can cause that. But us using gambling as a drug, which I believe we do to deal with those mental health disorders. And that's why, I'm working in programs where we focus on the mental health, on working on stopping that mental health. So even if our clients stop gambling, they're not like sort of what we use the term switching seats on the Titanic and now finding some other drug
Yeah.
or something else to get addicted to.
It's a disease of amnesia. We forget from day to day. And if you would journaling is so important. You could remember, like, how did you feel? What was that like? I clearly remember, I went to Penn State. I bet Penn State every game that they played. And if I didn't win my bet, if they would win the game, but I wouldn't win my bet, and my fraternity brothers are dancing in the street. I mean, they're parading, walking down Main Street. We won, we won. And I'm sitting there, oh my God, how am I going to get this $700? I got to pay this guy tomorrow. And my team won, but I lost. That's something that I will never, ever forget what that felt like.
What did it feel like?
Oh, I just felt like a loser, a failure. Why did I do this? And, once again, watching people dance in the streets and I'm sitting there scratching my head. Oh no, I did it again. I did it again. It's really important for me to remember that exact moment.
I think what you just did,
Mm.
Deb, is probably the most important part of this whole thing, is to connect, asking that question, how'd that make you feel?
I
Because a lot
couldn't
of
help
time,
it.
yeah, it was the best question of the whole show. How did that make you feel? Because that's what it uh, is that we don't see how that made us feel. And when we start talking about it, uh, that was brilliant. Thanks so much, Deb.
Thank you, Mark. That makes me feel so seen. That does. We got so we're Dan and I work in a Dan runs a fantastic program, and one of the things I do is, and what we do is slow people down and stop, like just now, as I did with Bob, and just said, and how did that make you feel? Because when you go back there and you go back to that feeling, that's the trick. It's going back to how that made you feel. And if I might, Dan, just talk about playing the tape, that's the thing about getting you to stop before you do it. Stop, go back to that moment, play the tape. How did that make you feel? And that might be the difference between not gambling and gambling again.
Yeah, like Bob says, it's a disorder of amnesia and making the connection between gambling, the results at the lowest, most painful moments, and your urge to gamble, like play the tape, like that feeling of holding your head in despair as everyone's dancing. It's important that that's accessible so that you make that connection when everyone around you is gambling. You're being targeted on the internet to gamble. Everything is moving in that direction, but no, there's that memory, that reality for you. I also want to say, don't be selective in the messaging that you get. Your friends, the algorithm, everyone's going to say, hey, it's not a big deal. Even LeBron James is saying it's not a big deal. You know in your heart that it's a big deal. So let those other messages bounce off that knowing and intelligence so that you can proceed forward without succumbing to an impulse to gamble.
Yeah, and I always say also play the tape if you don't gamble and get those feelings, the feelings of being with your
Right.
present with your family, or not having that debt or not feeling that guilt, and get those, that when we talk about neuroplasticity, is to start making those new connections. It would feel great if I don't gamble. I always say it's easier to stay stopped than to stop.
And to the audience, if there's anything that you would like to know more of, we would love to know. Always feel free to write in the chat. We will be talking more about neuroplasticity and some clinical things next week. We have a fantastic lineup next week. We have Matt, who is a guest, but I also would love Matt just to be part of the furniture here. We have Rob Minnick, who is, he's a how do I describe Rob? Rob is very well known to gamblers in recovery over here. He's a close friend and ally of Matt, and we all know Rob. You'll see him here. We're really excited to have him on board as well. And I'm just keen to talk about big things like maybe a bit of responsible gaming. That might be a good topic to bring up here on Stop Betting Sports. But please feel free always to ask us questions. We really want to know what you're needing, because we're here to support you. Also, Chat with Dan. Chat with Dan is a group on Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We are offering a space for parents to come in, or anyone, not just parents, who have been affected by their loved ones who are gambling, or they think they might be and don't know what to do about it. It is not therapy. It is a space for people to come and get some advice from us. Dan Field is an expert in the field. Do you like that, Bob? Thought you might like that little one-liner. Okay, guys, thank you again so much, SBS team, for your love and support here, providing the nation with an opportunity to try not to gamble today. Thank you to our audience. We hope to see you again next week. Take care. See you soon.